So let's go ahead now and in the second part, we're going to break down a little bit more into the New England colonies, and we'll do some compare and contrast here with what we just talked about, the Chesapeake Bay colonies, because what we're going to see is that there's a lot of differences as far as who's coming over, why are they coming over, and then once they do settle in the colony, how do they set up their life as far as day-to-day practices, as far as how they make their economics, their trade, and so forth. So let's go ahead and break down the New England colonies, and you can see here where we're talking about on this map on the right. So we're talking about Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, and then we'll see if we can kind of make some comparisons here to that of the Virginia colony. So first we need to make sure we understand the reasons for why they are coming over to the New World. So we talked about with the Chesapeake Bay Colony is that they're coming over for the gold. They're coming over for the economic reasons. However, that is not the case with that of the New England colonies. They are coming over for one of the other G's, which being God. They are coming over for religious purposes. Okay, they're coming over for religious freedom. So just to kind of put it into context with the Christian church, we should already know about the different schisms that take place amongst the major different sects of the faith, where you have the Eastern Orthodox versus the Roman Catholic that split over the idea of the Pope and their power, and then the Roman Catholic Church splits again and creates the Protestant Church. This is where Martin Luther comes in, who is protesting the Catholic Church. And if we want to focus just on England and their role in this, from England we get the Anglican Church. And this has come from where King Henry VIII comes from, where you have him wanting to annul his marriage, and he's not given the chance by the Pope, so he creates his own faith in England. And from this, then we have a whole bunch of other Protestant churches. We can see Episcopalian, Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, but for the most part, England follows the Church of England, which is Anglican. And as far as these Puritans come in, they are a very small minority group of England that believe in the idea of predestination. We should have mentioned this before in world history, where you are already predestined or predetermined. Fate has already determined whether you are going to heaven or hell and how you're going to live your life. And these people live very, very strict lives and try to be Christians without sin. And a lot of things that we would just take kind of casually they see as sinful. Things like the theater. Things like drinking alcohol. These are things that they do not want to do, that are very rampant in English culture and English society, that they believe should be outlawed, and they want to break away and create this kind of puritanical society that does not allow for these things. So if we take a look here at this chart, I really like the way that it breaks down, because you have all Anglicans, so you have all the Christians of England, and in that group you have some that consider themselves Puritans, people who want to purify the church, and then you also have a group within the Puritans called the Separatists, who basically have decided it's too late, the church is too far gone, the king is too corrupt, that it's time to separate and create our own, and they don't want to reform, they want to break away. And from this, these separatists become seen as religious pilgrims who are trying to flee and trying to create their own puritanical society. And they're going to form, just like Jamestown did, a joint stock company. They will become a charter, I believe it's called the Plymouth Charter, and they will sail across the Atlantic Ocean after leaving the Netherlands as well to form the Plymouth colony in what will become modern-day Massachusetts. And they're going to crash up their own Puritan colony in the New World. Now, before leaving the ship, the Pilgrims are going to sign and create what's called the Mayflower Compact, agreeing to work together for the good of society. And we were actually going to read the Mayflower Compact in class and kind of talk about it, because it is very important. And its real major significance is that it's really the first form of self-governance, or the society coming together, saying that they are in it for each other, not so much just individual wealth. And it really is this first form of self-government in the New World, and it kind of keeps playing on this idea that we've talked about multiple times now of salutary neglect, where the colonists are being able to set up their own systems of governance for themselves on the local level. So when the Pilgrims first get to the New World, just like those of Jamestown, they suffer from disease, hunger, cold, and it will take them a while to get their legs under them and kind of get the ball rolling. And from the beginning, the Pilgrims are having pretty good relationships with the natives. Once they are struggling, we already kind of know the idea of Squanto and Massasoit, those the teach them how to fish, how to farm on the land, and then kind of where the idea of the first Thanksgiving comes from, to kind of give thanks to local Indians for helping them out. And it kind of sets the stage now for a true puritanical colony in Massachusetts. And if you remember back to the chart that I showed you earlier where we had the circles and we had everybody under the same umbrella of Anglicans, but then you had within that you had the groups of Puritans, and then even within that you had the groups of separatists. Well, the separatists are the first ones to leave. And then when King Charles I comes to power in England, the Puritans are going to leave as well. They do not believe in his even more tyrannical power over that, kind of kicking out Parliament, having no say whatsoever within the democratic system of governance. So now you have two groups coming over. Now you have the Puritans coming over to the Plymouth colonies as well. And they will arrive in what becomes known as Boston and then eventually the colony of Massachusetts. And for the next decade, they're going to be led by Puritan leader John Winthrop. And you want to make sure that you know John Winthrop's name because he is the one who kind of brings Massachusetts to the forefront and creates this period known as the Great Migration, where you have large swaths of people leaving England for New England, especially Massachusetts. And you can see here, just breaking it down by the numbers, compared to Chesapeake, you have 4 times as many people migrating to New England. And you also have, as far as the Indian islands and so forth, like in the Bahamas, you have about the same amount of people. However, they're more sporadic. So here you have a lot more dense amounts of people who are part of this great migration, who are leaving, seeking refuge, who are seeking religious tolerance, religious freedom. They're seeking land for the first time and a chance to really kind of create their own wealth and future. And when John Winthrop arrives in Boston in 1630, the famous line becomes a city on a hill, and meaning that he wants it to become a model to other Christians, a model colony for those to flee to, for others to recreate, and kind of be this like utopia for that of the Puritan society. Now, one of the similarities that we see between that of the New England and Chesapeake colonies is that the idea of self-governance. And again, this idea of salutary neglect is going to take place in Massachusetts, where even though they are still a part of England, they are still an English colony, they do have these church and town meetings where people are coming together to create governance in the locality or on the locality level. And as long as you were an adult male and a member of the church, you were allowed to vote for different pieces of legislation, things that had to do with laws to govern the society, things to do with taxes. So this is really just like the House of Burgesses, a way for people to kind of self-govern, and we can kind of see the Enlightenment kicking in here, where people are ruling as a group rather than having 1 or 2 people in charge in that monarchical system. And from the success of the Massachusetts colony, you're going to have other New England colonies set up. You're going to have the likes of New Hampshire, Rhode Island, which was a colony that was founded by Roger Williams, is a good name to remember. Roger Williams being that of a man who was a Puritan who criticized the way that the Pilgrims had basically taken certain lands from the Native Americans and was so rightly in their eyes banished, and he formed his own colony of Rhode Island, where eventually other excommunicators like Anne Hutchinson will be taken out for merely the crime of questioning the role of the ministers in Puritan society. Now, sort of as I just kind of gave as a precursor with the idea of Roger Williams, who is criticizing the likes of John Winthrop for their relationships with the Native Americans as they kind of come through and take land. There's going to be conflict that expands into these new colonies, and one of the first major wars, being the Pequot War in 1637, is going to be an attack that leads to the death of 600 natives, and kind of sets a precursor to more and more conflicts throughout the next couple decades with the Native Americans over land. Another, this would have been King Philip's War or Queen Anne's War. Again, these are just conflicts that are taking place between the colonists and the natives because they're fighting over the land that is being distributed in the New England colonies. Now, one of the major problems that the Puritans are going to find is that even though they are seeking religious tolerance and freedom in England, they are very, very tolerant as long as you believe exactly what they believe, and they don't have a whole lot of room for discontent. They see that they are trying to create a puritanical society in their colonies, and they don't want anybody to break away from that. So when there is outspoken individuals who do this, they are typically banished, like I mentioned earlier, Roger Williams and Hutchinson, to name a few. And this is kind of seen as like a black mark on the Puritan church. And even though these colonies are set up for religious places for them to flee to, you start to have a drop off in church membership because the people are starting to disagree with the almost sort of theocracy or the theocratic nature of these colonies that are being created when the ministers and the preachers are having so much of an influence on the society, and anybody who steps slightly out of line or has any sort of critiques is being banished. So because they're having such a drop off in membership and such a kind of a failure from the perspective of society, they start doing methods of trying to bring back people, trying to entice those to come back to the church. Because remember, in order to be a part of the government or kind of be a part of the society as a whole, you had to be a member of the church. So one of the things they do is create these halfway covenants, which basically allowed for children of unconverted members to just be baptized within the church, and now all of a sudden you now are a full member of the Puritan church. So it's supposed to be a way to kind of make it easier for people to join the church and trying to help bring them back. But really what this did was show that the religious aspect was kind of dwindling, and that it was not as seen as important or as a necessity in the New England colonies as it originally was when Plymouth was first created. And then we get to the Salem witch trials. And these are basically going to be like the last nail in the coffin of the Puritan church and really the idea of having a theocratic colony in the likes of Massachusetts and so forth. And with this being said, you have a whole bunch of hysteria coming out from the likes of the ministers and the preachers of the Puritan church. And this hysteria really kind of starts over the fact that two young girls are starting to show symptoms that they cannot explain, things like convulsions, being super cold, almost kind of like a flu-like symptom that we would think of today, or having maybe epilepsy, but they could not explain it at that time. And what they essentially found them symptoms of was of bewitchment. And from there, you have a bunch of other girls who start showing the same symptoms, and they are starting to be convicted or starting to be tried and interrogated for being witches. And eventually it gets to the point where people are starting to push back against these trials, and then all of a sudden, if you are speaking out against the trials, that must mean that you are a witch or that you are pro-witch. And from this basically becomes a hysterical time of paranoia where you have people who are being accused for literally just wearing the wrong types of clothing or saying the wrong types of words, and in the end you have almost 20 people killed and over 150 people jailed for being convicted or being thought of being a witch. And this really is the downfall of the Puritanical church and will really kind of push the New England colonies into a period of less religious fervor, of less reliance on religion to kind of dictate the colony.